head again, making my way through crowded thoughts. Sometimes it's hard to get out of it. Broke my heart in the dark. I was just trying to feel something, falling asleep to the sound of it. Always used to lay you clean up the messes, down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I'm 45 years old. I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was shunned.
All right, Nicole. So how'd you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born and raised a classic born and raised Jehovah's Witness from birth. My dad became a Jehovah's Witness when he was about, I think, 7, and my mom when she was about, I think, 13. So I don't know if they become them at that age or if they're just swept up in their parents' choices. But yeah, that's how I became a Jehovah's Witness.
Okay, so both of them were exposed when they were very young, and then you were just simply born in and never had any other exposure, I'm assuming.
Right. No other choices. I ended up leaving, I think, when I was around 18 or 19, around in there. It's a little bit, ages are a little fuzzy, but yeah, somewhere around in there. For sure, by the time I was 19, I was out.
Okay. Well, when you don't celebrate birthdays, it's always hard to keep track of ages, right?
Exactly. Like, wait, how old was I? Yeah.
So then, being raised in it, what was the worldview that it gave you as you were being raised as a child inside of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, good question. So I think, looking back and after years of therapy, I can definitely say, like, it gave me this hyper vigilant view of the world, right? Because Armageddon was coming at any moment. So you're always just, feeling the pressure of your personal responsibility of saving the world, right? So I was very, I would say, anxious as a child. I always felt a deep responsibility, and I took that very seriously. I mean, I definitely believed everything that I was told. I was very observant. I wanted to be good. I wanted to follow the rules. I still am a very much a rule follower, and I still have that, wanting to do what's right is like one of my personal core values. So I guess in one way that's really good, but in another way that's also a very limiting view of the world. I always, was the one that wanted to be, going door to door and you know, giving talks. I would always raise my hand for last minute talks and things like that, because I wanted to do the best that I could.
And is that because you wanting to do the best that you could? I think you equated that earlier with being good. You wanted to be good, so you wanted to, quote, do the right thing. So
Right.
I guess you were trying to prove yourself as being good enough, which
Right.
is what most ex-Jehovah's Witnesses say, because and you were trying to do that through works.
Yeah, and also like you don't get a lot of external validation, I think, as kids in the church, except for doing those things, right? So kids need praise, and I was in an abusive household, and I wasn't getting a lot of, support or praise, but I could do these things and the congregation would give me praise. So that, was also another reason I really wanted to be seen as, a good, upstanding person in the church, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, it's so sad that most of us were so robbed of normal, healthy, loving relationships with that praise, and with parents who could see and and hear and feel and validate us, that we were trying to get it by acting our way into it, hoping to one day earn that love.
Exactly. And I think looking back, it definitely grooms you for being taken advantage of, right? Like, because you're always seeking approval from whoever's going to give it to you. So that leaves you vulnerable for predators, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. You mentioned, I guess, we'll get into, let's just go ahead and get into a little bit of your home life. So, growing up as a child, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, what was life like at home? We can talk both personally and then also, were you all the family that was, doing all the personal study and wrapped up in all the witness culture? But also, just what was your experience like? What was the temperature of the room, so to speak, in the house in which you grew up?
Well, yeah, I mean, we were definitely the family that was always prepared. We had I was the oldest of four kids. My parents didn't go to college, so my mom didn't even, I think my mom was the oldest of 10 kids. So I know, she ended up leaving school when she was I think in like 8th or ninth grade. So she definitely didn't have an education. And since Jehovah's Witnesses don't encourage you to go to college or anything like that, my dad was super smart, but it was such a waste because he just didn't go to college and we didn't have a lot of money growing up because of that, right? So it was a stress on my family, but my parents always, were the family that had it together on the outside. We were always prepared. We always did the pre-study, everything like that, and would always, go door to door on Saturdays as a family. Eventually my dad, became an elder. Uh, but at the same time, he was an alcoholic and very abusive to my mother, and to us kids, and he was just violent. So it was a lot of violence. When I got older, I remember like calling 911 when I was, a little bit older. Maybe I was around, I don't know, 11 when I first called 911. And the elders got involved. And, it was always this misogynist view of, well, what did my mom do to make my dad so mad, when she would try and leave, she did try and leave my dad a few times, but she was never able to kind of, get away enough. And that's very common in abusive relationships that I've learned since then. So, get sucked back in because of the elders, and also just where would she go? She had no money. She had four kids and she had no education. So,
Yeah, also it's the pattern she knew. It's the place we can even become comfortable in abuse because it's just all we know. It's the devil we know is better than the devil we don't sometimes.
Yeah. And my mother was severely mentally ill. She had multiple personality disorder. She had been severely abused as a kid herself. So I have a lot more perspective now on like what she was going through. And I don't blame her. I mean, I get why she stayed in this relationship. She really didn't have a choice. So, I believe they're still in the church. I haven't had any contact with them, and I think I've talked to my mom like once or twice in my adult life. So, it wasn't a great place. It wasn't great. And the elders were terrible. They, blamed the victims. They didn't offer any real support or counseling. In fact, they encouraged not to get any sort of real therapy or help. And, when my mom finally started going to therapy, they really gave her a hard time about it. And, she is someone that really needed help. She was severely mentally ill, and in this horribly abusive relationship. And, it's a miracle we didn't all end up dead, frankly. I'm just like looking back at, like, because I'm really into true crime now, like looking at like all the warning signs were there of just like it could go horribly wrong. At one point, my dad sold his guns, I think, because he kind of realized that he shouldn't have them in the house, because it could really escalate. So, it wasn't a safe place, long story short, to grow up, and, between my home life being such a mess and, basically being groomed by the church to be a victim my whole life, it was ripe for predators. And we had church, I call it a church now, but, the congregation, the church friends, there was a couple that my parents were friends with, and they would have us spend the nights on the weekends and just to kind of get out of the house. They knew the house situation wasn't great, but then, the husband was a pedophile. And so he molested all three of me and my two sisters. So it's like, that was par for the course. I think it was just set up to be that way in that church, because they really are a misogynist culture. There's, anytime you want to bring in outside help, you are threatened with being disfellowshipped. And, you really have to kind of know your place, So, I can get into what happened later on when I finally came out about the sexual abuse, but, you know, that was horrible, because they the only reason he even was finally reprimanded is because they caught him in a lie, and it couldn't be denied that he did what he did, because they caught him lying about it. And, but I had to sit there with the elders and tell them everything in minute detail, and then have them still be like, the worst kind of victim blaming. But what did you do? Did you encourage this? All that kind of stuff. And,
And how old were you when this was going on?
by the time, well, I'm kind of jumping around in the story, but basically by the time I got to high school, it was really, my mental health was not good. I'd already tried to commit suicide a few times, and I really was just not in a good place, like mentally, under a lot of stress. I would say I probably had PTSD. And so, I had taken a psychology class in high school, and one of the things we had to do for class every week was kind of write kind of like a diary entry. She called them, I can't remember what she called them, thought assignments. And so, there was a section on abuse, childhood abuse. And so I think that just really brought up a lot for me. And I had written, I don't even actually remember writing this, but I had written about being abused. And apparently, so many people in her classes wrote about being abused. It was like an epidemic. And so she somehow, because she was also a private therapist, got permission from the school, my teacher did, to bring us all together. Like I just got like a note saying, come to this teacher's class during, seventh period today. So I went, and there was like 40 people in the room, 45 people in the room. And we were all just like, why are we here? And she's like, you've all indicated to me that you've been abused in some way. And the school has given me permission to do group therapy with you guys if you want to do it. And and it's free, and we would do it during school hours. You wouldn't be, marked down for missing any classes. And this is my junior year of high school. And, she's like, I just asked for a 6-week commitment. So I think there was around 7 or 8 groups, and by the end of the 6th week, my group was the only group that was left because, we didn't realize it at the time, but of course she's a mandatory reporter. And so, by week 2 or 3, the police are involved and parents are involved. And, most parents don't want their kids getting therapy at school or even, it was a very conservative small town. And so, most kids weren't allowed to continue. Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow I was able to kind of keep it secret for a while. And so this went on for a couple months that I was doing this secret therapy at school. And then finally, I think that there was just so many kids that there was probably a backlog because,
Yeah.
sure, of people getting informed. But somehow, at some point, I had to basically tell my parents what was going on, and the police wanted to do an interview and everything. So it kind of all came out, But surprisingly, I was really impressed with my dad at the time because my dad never questioned it. It was almost like he probably knew it on some level. And so he was very supportive, and he, they allowed me to do whatever. He was like, do whatever you need to do and let me know, what I can do to support you. But, the elders had to get involved because the police were involved, and come to find out this person had already been kind of on their radar and the police's radar. And so, I was basically told in meeting with the elders that if I pursued supporting the police and this went to trial or whatever, and I testified, that I would be disfellowshipped because I wasn't allowing the church to handle their own business,
Whoa.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
You were told that if you support the police, or I guess, because it's not even about supporting the police, it's about if you're called to testify or to give statements or whatever the case may be and just be honest, I don't know, give Caesar's things to Caesar, like they say, you're going to be disfellowshipped for that.
Yeah, I would definitely be, reprimanded and possibly disfellowshipped because I wasn't, allowing the church to do their own process, and it would bring shame upon the Jehovah's Witness name. Yeah. So
That's so. Let's just take a break for a second there. I've got a few questions. We can jump back into to seeing where that goes from there, but because this is a lot, and first of all, it's just really sad and really says a lot that so many kids in your class were writing about abuse. That is,
isn't that crazy?
Well, sadly, I don't think it's that crazy. I think that if we really knew what went on in a lot of houses, there would be, even today, a whole lot of kids raising their hands and saying things that were indicative of abuse, and that's just really sad. It's a statement about the situation of humanity. But
yeah, and there was only 100 kids in my graduating class, so this wasn't a huge high school or anything like that. So that makes it even worse. I mean, like 45%. That is an epidemic. That's horrific.
It is, and let's say they weren't all Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
No, I was the only one, but yeah.
So abuse is clearly not just a Jehovah's Witness problem, but obviously Jehovah's Witnesses have a major problem in the way in which they handle abuse that goes on, and the fact that, as you've already mentioned, I mean, there's the misogyny, there's also the isolation, which is rife for abuse. The way they isolate from the world, from mental health professionals, from, well, pretty much anything healthy.
Yeah.
And so in all this, would it be safe to say, so, I mean, first we have the abuse from your dad, the violence there, and it sounds like so the elders had two witnesses there, right? I mean, because they knew this was happening to various members of your family. So did they ever act against your father back then in any way?
Not at all. No, in fact, he was allowed to continue, being an elder. I mean, I don't think he was ever really reprimanded for being abusive ever. Yeah, no.
Um, just that's sad, but I can see it. My dad was abusive mentally and emotionally and verbally. And I know that the elders knew about it because my mom reported to the elders who then interviewed us kids. And I was in many, many interviews and nothing ever came of any of that over the years. So yeah, they've got somebody who will do their bidding or is one of the good old boys club.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not going to do anything about that. Because he's one of them.
Yeah. Before I forget about this, I wanted to mention it too. Like, because he was an elder, he had access to like the elder books of like what you're supposed to do. And I remember sneaking one time when he was out of the house and looking in the elder book about like what they said to do for people that were abused sexually. And it definitely was like, didn't nothing in there was like go to the police, it was always like, get the story, document it. So they definitely kept records, um, and then send it to, the headquarters so that they could keep records. But it was like actively encourage people not to participate with the police. And that was in black and white, in their guidance to the elders. So it wasn't like it was just a bad congregation that was like, rogue. This was coming from the top, and they had every ability to know who abusers were because they just like the Catholic Church keeping track of people, but then just not really doing anything to keep kids or families safe. I think, as I think back on that through, in my adult looking back through being healthier now, it's just like that to me is so disgusting and reprehensible. It's such an abuse of your spiritual power, every kind of power that you would have in these situations, because these people in these congregations, I mean, the elders were like, they were the final word. They controlled all your social standing, your everything is wrapped up in the congregation. So to have that much power and to abuse it like that is just really horrible.
Oh yeah, I mean, um, they have absolute power in the congregation, and it really creates a lot of corruption. You're talking about them having records. I mean, there are leaked videos where from the organization at this point where they're saying things like destroy the records because the records are getting us in trouble.
Yeah.
So they know that what they do causes problems or covers up problems, but instead of trying to adjust that, they double down on it and say, now let's just cover up the problems and also destroy the records so that there's no indication that there are problems.
Exactly.
And then, of course, back in the day, people were more discouraged. Well, I can't speak to every situation today. I'm just going to speak to what the organization says today. But it's just interesting to watch their weasel words because back in the day, they were discouraging people from going to the police. And today they say things like, it's every member's right to go to the police. Well, they're saying it's your right, but that's so weaselly. They're not saying we encourage our members to go to the police.
Right. And it is your right, but if you exercise that right, there will be consequences, right? Just, I could have still gone and supported the police investigation when I was young, but who, when you're a teenager, wants to be shunned? You're still living at home. My sister, actually, my younger sister, had been disfellowshipped because again, she was rife for predators. And so she got caught up when she was, I think she was around 13 with this. He wasn't in the church, but, she was seeking approval from older men. And she got caught up by this predator and she ended up running away and he took her all the way to Oregon. Thank God she was able to get, found by police and brought back, but she was raped by this guy and, she got disfellowship for it, and it's like, I'm sorry, what? There's no way she could consent to this, you know, uh, maybe look at why she ran away. Maybe look at, the conditions in her home life that made her feel like that was a good option for her, and instead, no, just, she had sex, so she gets disfellowshipped. So,
No, they don't care who you are. They
right.
don't care why you do what you do. They just care that you did it, and it's all about upholding rules and punishing.
Yeah.
And it's not about love at all, as they say, because if it was, you would look at a 13-year-old girl
Yeah.
and say, why is this 13-year-old girl acting out this way?
Yeah.
And I don't know if they knew at the time or not about your family and what was going on there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this has been going on for years,
Okay, all right.
That
Well then,
was
I mean, come on, guys, what are you doing?
yeah. Yeah, it was, but I was still like in the mindset of like she was wrong, I didn't speak to her during because that's what you're not supposed to speak to someone. You're supposed to shun them, right? So my own little sister, is going through all this, not getting any therapy, not getting any support. She's disfellowshipped, and even at home, she's being shunned. That's terrible.
When you say, yeah, that is terrible. I hope you can forgive yourself for that because you were just a kid following the only path you had ever known as well. I mean, where were you going to learn anything healthy other than to follow those same shunning rules?
Right.
Um,
So that's the kind of vibe it was. It was like, was I going to really put myself in a situation where I was going to, be potentially disfellowshipped? That's like the worst thing that can happen to you, right? Life is over at that point. So it's like, even though I was like desperately trying to find some sort of support and health for myself, like because I did stick to therapy for months, and it, I'm so grateful to have that opportunity for therapy when I was in high school, because without that, I definitely would not be where I am today. Who knows what would have happened to me, right? So, that saved my life essentially. Even though it wasn't like the end of my mental health struggles, it was just, I at least had a foundation of understanding what was going on. And this teacher, she continued to do group therapy for our group and also one-on-one therapy for each of us for free for like at least a year and a half. So, she really took her own personal responsibility to us seriously and made a commitment to helping us.
wow, what a person she was. That's a beautiful thing to do. I can't imagine what it would be like to have a class and look out and see 45 people who are staring back at you, children staring back at you in a classroom that are being abused. That's gut wrenching.
Yeah. So, I really am grateful that I had that opportunity, because it definitely changed my life and kind of destigmatized getting help, and that it was just a normal thing to do. And so that kind of opened the door for my mom to start getting because she also provided therapy for free to my mom. Um, she really went above, she didn't have to do any of this. And so, she really, I mean, when they talk about teachers changing your life, like that's definitely high on my list of teachers changing my life.
Yeah, I don't know how much higher you can get. My goodness. I don't know if you've ever had a chance or what the circumstances are to thank that person, but that would be an amazing thing, I'm sure, to get to do.
Yeah, I've definitely over the years kind of tried to find her. You know, that whole situation, like because there were so many people and it was a heavily Mormon community that I grew up in, she got a lot of shit for it. A lot. And she ended up like once kind of, the dust settled and, everything kind of the administration was like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have let her do that, because they started getting shit for it from parents
Oh
and
yeah, from abusive parents, I'm sure.
yes, exactly. And so she ended up eventually losing her job over it. But yeah, I think she didn't regret it, is what she said to me. But yeah, she ended up, I don't even know what she does now, but I mean, I haven't been able to find her on the internet or anything, but which is kind of weird, really, when you think about how everyone's on the internet now. But you know, I think it was a small town. Who knows what happened to her after that? But I kind of left town, uh, you know, after I graduated high school. But you know, yeah, I mean, I can get into that part of the story if you want, but she definitely there was repercussions. It wasn't like she just got to do this and she didn't have any personal repercussions from it. I definitely respected the fact that she made some choices to help some kids and she didn't care that there was repercussions because it was the right thing to do. You know?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Well, I know we don't know who she is, but much love to that
Yeah,
woman who took the time to help some people, even at personal cost in many ways, and not just helping people, helping kids, a bunch of hurting kids. My goodness.
yeah.
Um, can I ask? You had mentioned that part of your abuse, there was a pedophile in your congregation. Was that person also an elder?
No, he wasn't. No, he was just yeah, he wasn't ever kind of motivated to rise through the ranks like that. But and now we know why. He had other interests. I mean, I assume he probably didn't even believe it. He was just there because it was a great ripe picking grounds.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, actually, if he'd risen farther and become an elder, he would have had more probably private access to kids, which is scary too.
Exactly.
That's just a terrible situation, and I like that you've repeatedly mentioned the fact that I was talking with someone the other day, and uh, they were talking about how they hoped their child would never grow up and join a cult, right? I mean, don't we all feel that way? Um, but as we were talking about, I was like, well, if your child has a healthy sense of self and loves themselves and is confident and it has healthy tools at their disposal, hopefully they won't be vulnerable and ripe for the picking. But somebody like yourself or most of us who are raised in the cult, we didn't have a healthy sense of self or any
Yeah.
confidence. We were, like you said, looking and begging, desperately trying to get attention or affection in any form, even in a dysfunctional form, because we had never even seen anything healthy.
Right.
So it just sets up such a bad situation that's rife for abuse. Um, I'm
You
sorry
did.
that you got caught up in it.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I thought about this a lot of like even here living in California is like there's a lot of self-help guru kind of situations that whether it's yoga or anything that you start kind of losing your sense of self into that you kind of get stuff. It's like this whole surrender culture.
Cults exist in many ways.
It's just like, yeah, I think misogyny and the patriarchy do that as well. It's like our culture as Americans isn't so great for women in general to, not just to focus on women, because of course it happens to men too, but I think,
Oh yeah, the patriarchy is mostly good for the men at the top.
yeah, exactly. But like, women are, uh, abused at higher rates, let's just put it that way, in our culture. And so I think it's like, just there is so many opportunities. It doesn't have to be so drastic as being in a cult, like there's so many, just staying in abusive relationships. I mean, look at how many women are murdered by their domestic partners or husbands or what, in these situations. It's like because they've never got the skills to leave abusive relationships. And it
There's no
is.
self-worth.
Yeah, exactly. So it can happen in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be so dramatic as being like, oh, I was in a cult.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I would say that if you're in one of those domestic violence relationships, you're pretty much in a cult of that person.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
There's a lot of ways to phrase it, or however you want to say it. I mean, cults are just a reflection of power dynamics and abuse that can occur in many different settings, whether it's religious or gurus or business or personal relationships. There's just so many ways. It's sadly just an abusive form of relationship that humans do to one another in many different ways.
Yeah. I really feel like, true crime has become such a popular genre. And I think, all the women I've spoke to that are into true crime, because I really got into it as part of like my recovery process uh, in healing. And I think it was because it helped me see that like I definitely wasn't alone in these patterns. And I think, the rise of the genre has been a healing tool. Hopefully, I hope it's like this is my own personal analysis, but I feel like there's so many people that use these stories of true crime and to say, oh wow, well this is also happening to me, right? And so it's will be interesting to see in the culture if there is kind of a rise in people's skills in learning how to get out of these kind of situations, just because these stories are getting out there more, right?
Well, yeah, when people hear that they're not alone and they can see, I mean, just when people listen to your story here, there's somebody else out there that's gone through something similar, and just it helps to know that you're not alone and that others can make it out of the situation as well.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and it just makes you feel not so alone.
absolutely. It's so key. Like, I think that was such a smart way that my teacher did that, of like starting us off in groups, because, there was people, and there's my group was all girls, but there was like girls that were super popular, girls that were, from every social kind of setting of our school, girls that were nerds, girls that were goths, all these girls that, came from well-respected families, girls that were poor. It's just like all kinds of people, and you really realize, wow, this affects everyone, not just a certain kind of person, right?
Yeah, I don't think we realize as humans uh, the dearth of healthy families
Yeah,
and just how sad the situation truly is, because we've never had insight into that in a large scale. And today, with the information age and everyone being able now to tell their stories, just like the Me Too movements and other things, hopefully all of these things shed a light on all of the different sad and unhealthy realities that exist, so that we can start to work on these things. But for so long, all of that stuff was hidden.
yeah, absolutely. And it thrives in being hidden. So
Oh yeah, shame and abuse thrives in the dark and in isolation, and that's how cults operate and get away with it as well. So now that I think we're just at the beginning of shining a light on all of this. And it's, sadly, I think it's going to take a long time for us to heal from all of this, but hopefully it is an upward trajectory as more and more people are able to speak out, and more people then are able to see that it's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to need help. It's okay to have been abused, but it's not where you want to stay. So work towards something else, to empower women and anyone who is marginalized. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and we're just, I think, just barely getting started.
Yeah. So, I mean, therapy is a really great place to start. And it was for me.
Yes, it is. It starts with you. You've got to work on yourself. You can't help anyone else or anything else unless you are healthy yourself. So, or start getting that way. So, so in your life, where we stopped, you were kind of at this precipice where you were warned not to support the police. And, of course, you were saying you were seeing yourself, you already saw your sister get shunned, and this isn't a path you wanted to go down. So what came of all of that?
So I basically, all my diaries were taken as evidence. So you can imagine I really love, writing things down now. It's like, not at all. And so, all my diaries were all my therapy journals were taken as evidence by the police. But nothing, because I wasn't willing to testify or anything, nothing really happened to him legally. But he did end up getting disfellowshipped. And at this point, I was a junior in high school. And so I ended up leaving 2 days after I graduated. So I had one more year left. And so he was disfellowshipped my final year of high school. But pretty much as soon as I left, within a few months, he was reinstated. And so, it just kind of was a tool for them to appease probably my dad, and, I wasn't the only one he did it to. So there was other, my sister, and also, one other girl that this had happened to, who was was a close friend of mine. And so, there was enough witnesses, I guess, that they never said oh, we need 2 witnesses, but, they definitely always wanted, to know who knew what about everything,
Sure. I'm sorry that happened. It shows the impotence of the disfellowshipping arrangement. I mean, there's no teeth there. So you kicked him out, big deal. He'll just come back and be allowed to prey on the congregation again.
And because everyone will, no one's ever said here's a pedophile in your midst, and you would get in trouble if you were to out him as that, right? So it was not a great situation, but luckily I was able to leave. Because I was doing, I continued in therapy and continued to be, getting help. I, gained a lot more confidence in my life. I ended up my senior year doing an internship at a graphic design studio. And because even though, I had opportunity to go to college, I wasn't planning on going to college because I was going to be a pioneer, right? So I was still very much believing the church even through all of this, right? So so my best friend had moved to Washington State, and I had gone up, in the summer to visit her, and over holiday, spring break and stuff. And so I wanted to move up there and, be part of the congregation up there. My senior year, I did an internship at a graphic design studio, kind of school to work kind of thing. So where I had computer skills. So I did have a job waiting for me up there. I think that, it was like 94. So the internet was like in its infancy, and, people were just starting to use computers, like, to design stuff. And I had all those skills. So, you didn't have to like do it all by hand on the light table anymore. Right. So, I think the person that ended up hiring me said, "Oh, I thought you were," after I showed up and was working there, he's like, "I thought you were graduating college." I was like, "No, I was graduating high school." Cause like I had like a portfolio, was very professional and everything. So, I was lucky in that I had some skills, that paid really well at the time with computers. And that gave me a lot of confidence. And I, was, even though I moved to Washington, I was still like becoming a pioneer. And, I wanted to get married to, this young ministerial servant and everything. I luckily at the time it wasn't great, but I ended up in this house full of these other young Jehovah's Witness girls. And I had never really been around that many people my own age. Because there just wasn't that many people in my congregation growing up. And so suddenly I was living in this house with 4 other girls. 2 of them were Canadian. And so you could drink when you were 18 in Canada, right? And it was right near the border. So they would go up to visit their family and bring alcohol back. And so we would, have a house party, just the 5 of us in this house. But I was like the first time I ever drank, got drunk. We were definitely being bad, Um, there was dating going on, unchaperoned dating.
Oh no.
Yeah, that quickly devolved that into everybody getting in trouble.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so one
Because
girl
you were being normal for a minute.
exactly. One girl got pregnant. One girl eloped. It just all like this built up over a year, and we were all pioneers, I have to tell you. So it's kind of ridiculous.
So a house full of what, 5 pioneers?
Yes, we were all like these good girls, right? We were all like somewhere between like, I was 17, but I was about to turn 18. And so, they were all, between like my age and like 19. I think one girl was 20. And so, we were just being normal young adults, and, this would have been my probably college experience, but I didn't go to college. So, we were, hanging out with boys, drinking, getting in trouble, but no, smoking cigarettes, doing things that we weren't supposed to, smoking pot, um, all this kind of stuff. And nobody was, talking about, we weren't ratting each other out, but eventually when someone got pregnant, that's when kind of shit hit the fan, and you can't really hide that anymore. So they went to the elders because obviously they had to. And one of the other girls ended up eloping with her boyfriend, who was also in the church. But I was seeing someone secretly who wasn't in the church. And that I kind of started to wake me up a little bit, where I was like, well, what's wrong with this? It felt really normal, right? I was like, his family was so nice. Like, if my car broke down, they'd figure it out and help me fix it, or, come change a tire. Like, they'd have me over for dinner, just like watch a movie, like normal people, right? And I was really like started to have crisis of faith of like, but I thought these were people that were evil. How could this feel so right if, it's these are terrible people? Like, it just, starts to kind of, you have that cognitive dissonance of like, this doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, because you held one thing to be true and now you're saying it's a lie.
Yeah. So I was like, I need to get out of here, because I'm going to end up, getting disfellowshipped if I continue on this path. And, I had secret sex, with this guy, and I was really felt like I was in love with him, and I was like, I gotta get out of here. I'm gonna end up getting disfellowshipped. Shit was already going down with the other girls, and I knew it was just a matter of time before they found out I had even been dating him. And so I was like, I'm gonna move to Tennessee to live with my grandparents, because then I can get my faith back, right? Because I just felt like I was having a crisis of faith, and I just needed to get it together. So, plus that bought me a little bit of time before I was outed as dating, right? So I moved to Tennessee and was still a pioneer. And my grandparents were so proud of me. I'd never really hung out with, those were my mom's parents. I'd never really hung out with them growing up. And so it was kind of really nice to have that time with them. I think I'd seen them twice growing up because they lived so far away. And, it was, where the need was greater, and so we were, just spending all of our time. But I still smoked cigarettes secretly. And my grandmother kind of was trying to bust me for it. Eventually, I think the elders called my grandfather and was like, some shit went down here. And so, I was still in contact with that guy that I had been dating. They moved to San Francisco, him and his best friend, and we would write letters, and they were, very romantic. And I started reading books. Like, I went to the library and I got, J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zoe. I got a book by Joseph Campbell about the power of myth. And it wasn't like I looked these books up. I just sort of wandered around the library and they spoke to me, kind of thing. And I started realizing that I wasn't crazy. This was absolutely normal to have these kind of ideas that there was more than one path to truth, and that, that this had been going on for centuries with humanity, basically. And, that it was okay. I was going to be okay. And I decided that I should leave the church and move to be with this boy that I loved. And so right around that time, so I was working and saving money and being a pioneer and just kind of living this double life still. Then my grandfather, who was an elder, got a message from the congregation in Washington, shit went down, you need to investigate this. And they were so disappointed in me, And so basically I was like, yeah, it happened. I had sex, smoked cigarettes. I'm leaving the church. I'm not going to be part of this anymore. And they were like, there's nothing you want to try and stay. And I was like, absolutely not. So, when you get disfellowshipped, I didn't realize this, but you really can't tell anyone that you're getting disfellowshipped. At least that was the process for me. And so there was this 2-week period, because I think you had a week where you can appeal it. And then you have a week, before they announce it. So there was this 2-week period where I was still there. I was still kind of going through this process. My grandparents, I had become close to people in that congregation, but I couldn't, they all thought that I was moving to California to, work where the need was greater, because I couldn't tell them that I was, getting disfellowshipped, which in retrospect, I can't believe I went along with all of that, but I was brainwashed still.
Of course, we all did what we had to do to survive the situation we were in with the tools we had.
Exactly. So, I definitely hurt people there. There was this older woman who her husband died right when I moved there, who was a close friend of my grandparents, and I really became close with her, and she was just devastated when it was announced, because I left on a Monday, and I think they announced it Wednesday or Thursday or something. And so, it was definitely a shock to people. And, that was that. I was in California. I was living in the Bay Area, and I was free for the first time. I moved here with a duffel bag, one of those army duffel bags that you can put on your back full of clothes and books and $500, and that was it. That's what I had.
Wow. Can I ask, since you got disfellowshipped, then obviously there was a devastation of, well, having to play along for 2 weeks is really tough, and the devastation of having your grandparents be proud and then feel disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
But what about your family as well? Did they know? How did they find out, I guess?
Oh, well, my grandparents made me call my parents and tell them what was up. And my dad was, I think I still have this letter somewhere, but he, had written me this letter about how I was being selfish and I was going to die at Armageddon and I needed to get it together, basically. And, I just was determined I was going to leave. I just was done with it. I didn't believe it anymore. And, I really believed that I was in love, with this kid. And so I just knew in my heart that love could never, if you were truly following a path of love, how could that be bad? Because God is love, right? So how could that ever be a bad thing? And I just knew that if I followed the path of love, that everything was going to be okay. I just had faith in love. So I really tried to have that as my guide through life since then, that I was going to follow this path wherever it took me. And if I died, I was going to die, but I was going to follow this, what I felt was right.
Sure.
And
yeah. And how much is that in contrast? I mean, like your dad writing you this letter about being selfish and all of that. Wouldn't it be far more selfish to expect someone to live an inauthentic life forever for you so that you can be happy, and you were also comparing this dream you had in California to the abuse that you had suffered your whole life.
Yeah. So I don't know how I got the strength to do it, but I was just like determined. So yeah, I felt really, once the reality of moving though kind of sunk in, I was like, oh, this is okay. Path of love. Here we go. Everything's going to be okay. I just had this and things, San Francisco is one of these towns that, especially back then, things have changed so much with the tech industry, but back then you could still get a semi-cheap apartment, and it's the kind of town where it will let you know if you're supposed to be there or not. Like, it's kind of magical in some weird ways of like doors opening to you, because it is a small town and it's only 7 square miles, so people do kind of know each other, and it's all about kind of connections, and oh, you want to work in this, and I know somebody that can help you, kind of thing. So when I first moved here, I was living with my boyfriend and his best friend, and we all stayed in this one very small room in this residential hotel, and 3 of us shared a bed, and we were very close. It wasn't like weird sexually, but we were just very close friends. And so you know I was in North Beach, and I was able to meet one of my friends that I still have to this day. She's like one of my best friends. We've been friends since then, and I'm 45 now, so it's 25 years later, and we're still really close. And I met her at a cafe on the sidewalk, drinking cappuccinos and writing poetry. So those are the kinds of opportunities I was having, of like interacting with normal people out on the street. And I was just so naive that I just really trusted people, and that's good and bad. But because of that, I was able to. I'll tell you this crazy story. So I was in North Beach. My boyfriend and I ended up breaking up, and and I was still living in that residential hotel, but just by myself at that point. And I had been working at this kind of hippie shop, and the owner invited me over for dinner and dosed me with LSD without my consent or knowledge. And so I was like appalled by that the next day once I realized what had happened, right? So I quit that job and I was like, what am I going to do? I really need a job, right? So one of the people I met in North Beach was this really, I mean, probably mentally ill person that was like a yoga guru. But he was like, well, I'm going to come over and like, let's meditate and get you a job. I was like, all right, sounds fine. Let's do this. So he came over and sitting there meditating. I had never meditated in my life. I didn't know if I was doing it right. I had no idea. I'd just been dosed with acid like the day before. So, who knows what was going on in my head. So, we're sitting there meditating and my phone rings, and I had had a job as a barista like maybe 6 months earlier. And at this building that was full of software startups, and Adobe was in that building too. So it was like a lot of different tech companies. And so I had forgotten I had given my resume to this software engineer for one of these. They made graphic design software. And so like plugins for Photoshop. And I was familiar with their product because I had worked as graphic designer. And so this was just at the beginning of the tech, the first.
Yeah, I was gonna say this right. Had to be back at the beginnings of all of this.
This was like 96, right? So I had completely forgotten about that. But as I'm sitting there meditating with this guy in my little residential hotel room, my phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's this guy I gave my resume to months ago. He was like, yeah, I'm looking for someone to come do quality assurance. We're in a really tight deadline. Do you want this job? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually interviewing right now. I kind of played hard to get, and I ended up getting paid really well. Just went in the next day, had the job, didn't even have to interview for it, just had this job, which was an amazing job. I ended up running the QA department at that software company by the time I was 20. And, it was a great springboard for, not ever going to college, but having tech skills because of, I grew up with like a Commodore 64. It was like one of the first generations of kids to have those computers in the house. I just had those skills, So I was lucky and that I got that job. But I always laugh about that, of like how meditation and the following path of love got me a really great job that I didn't have to go to college for,
Hey, congratulations. I mean, it does speak to obviously being in the right place at the right time, being at the forefront of some tech industries, being exposed to certain things. But can we also say you apparently also have some innate intelligence and skill that is also to be celebrated as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was definitely, I love that story because it just kind of shows like you can be an outlier, but it's also a lot about luck and kind of being where you are at the right time, right? So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of me working in tech, and I ended up working in tech for like a while, and then using those skills that I had learned in software development and web development to, translate that to the nonprofit industry, and started like building websites and doing fundraising online for nonprofits very early on. This was like right before Howard Dean, started using the internet to raise money. So I think I was like part of a group of people that, we raised $1 million online for one of our clients because I worked at this boutique agency that helped nonprofits raise money. And, I think we were one of the first groups to really raise a significant amount of money using the web, And so I really was proud of that because I was like, these are going to be huge tools for nonprofits. And now you look today and everyone uses, it's like an integrated part of their strategy, right? So I was really proud of being able to kind of see tech in that way. But at the same time, because of the way I was raised, I didn't have good boundaries of like self-care, right? So I was working myself to the bone, right? Like back then, software development really wasn't like work-life balance like it is today. They would really, you would, have deadlines and you would work, 60 hours a week was normal.
Well, sure, but of course, just being an ex-Jehovah's Witness or being raised in that environment creates workaholism in a
Yeah.
lot of us. So
So,
you would fit in well there, I'm sure.
yeah. So it was great. Like I was very successful, but also like I didn't have a college degree. So it was easy for me to be taken advantage of, I feel like. So, I always was working really hard. I was obviously really smart, but I also was still being taken advantage of in these industries. And so you can only do that for so long before something has to give, right? And so I think, I still was having bad relationships because I had done therapy in high school, but I hadn't really continued on with therapy. So working a lot like that was very stressful. So I started drinking, it just became this, over drinking. I had a lot of pressure on me for a 20-year-old running a department and not having really any like real skills or like knowledge of how to like the world really worked, right?
Well, yeah,
Because
you're
like,
a 20-year-old at the forefront of a tech boom who survived trauma and still needs help and is also still just 20 and trying to figure it out. So yeah, that's a recipe there for some tough times.
yeah, so I definitely, was drinking a lot, had a lot of just like, I was also like free to have sex, right? For the first time in my life. So I was having a lot of sex. Just, it was a wild time. Like, I was having fun, but also like in retrospect, like I would have really benefited from continuing therapy, right? So was, I wasn't able to have like long-term healthy relationships and I was hiding in workaholism. So that really caught up to me by the time I was in my early 30s. And, I was having longer term relationships, but they were abusive relationships. And, that's really, it became really dangerous, right? I was with someone eventually who, I still had always had a really bad depression, and I would periodically just try and kill myself. I've tried to kill myself probably, I don't know, many, many times. Probably at least 40 times in my life. And, it worked a few times. I've been brought back twice. And, I ended up, um, long story short, I was working in this really well-known tech, um, nonprofit tech company. And this is, I'm in my early 30s at this point, and I was with someone who I'd never been with someone who was bipolar before. Oh, and eventually I came out as gay as well. So that happened. I had a failed marriage in there to a man. All kinds of stuff happened, but I ended up coming out. And so this is one of my first like long-term girlfriend situations. Probably the second girlfriend I lived with. But she was bipolar and I didn't realize, she never disclosed that to me until after we were living together. I didn't have any experience with it. Of course I, had grown up with a mentally ill mother, but I was, didn't have an experience with intimate partnerships, but she was very controlling and she ended up being very paranoid and she was in law enforcement and it just became this horrible situation of the cycle of domestic violence. And she threatened to kill me. She took me to where, like, she would leave my body, all kinds of things like that, and so the stress of that really played its toll on top of years and a decade of workaholism. So, ended up leaving her. I was in a new job. I was like an executive producer at this real youth nonprofit, trying to use media to build movements with youth, and I just basically couldn't function anymore at that point. My anxiety was so high. I had been off and on kind of in talking therapy, but it wasn't really helping, because I had tried to kill myself so many times. It was just sort of like I realized I needed help, but I wasn't getting the right kind of help. So when this all went down and basically like a restraining order was issued on my behalf by the district attorney because she was a cop and they caught her trying to use the system to find out where I lived. Yeah, no, I'm very lucky to be alive because, the only reason she didn't find out where I lived was because I put a friend's address on my car registration because I knew that it was dangerous to have my own address. So, yeah, after all that went down, I basically just had like a nervous breakdown and was like, the only way out of this is to kill myself. Like, I definitely need to, this is it. I can't do this anymore. And so, that was one of the times I was like successfully tried to kill myself and was brought back. And that was the last time that happened. But after that, I was able to get the real help that I needed. So I started doing dialectical behavior therapy, diagnosed as having borderline personality disorder. And so, everything made so much more sense then, like, oh, why do I want to kill myself all the time? Oh, why, why am I unable to have successful relationships? Why do I choose these abusive people? Like everything kind of, fell into place when I started getting the right kind of therapy, right? And so, it's such an amazing set of skills that you learn, and it really kind of reprograms your brain and such a elegant way to actually have skills to deal with what's going on. And so,
Allow me to break in here for a second. This channel is made possible by you, the listener. If you appreciate what we're doing here, please consider supporting at patreon.com/shunned, or leave a review on iTunes or other platforms. Like and subscribe. All those things help the channel. If you're looking for merch, you can go get some Shun swag from the shunnedpodcast.com website or reach out there to be on the show. If you're looking for more ex-Jehovah's Witness content, I'll recommend my first podcast called This JW Life. You can find that on podcast apps as well as YouTube. And if you're feeling stuck in life, struggling to find happiness and community, maybe you're haunted by the past, beating yourself up, unsure of who you are or what you even want out of life now that you've lost this one identity that was given to you by a cult, reach out through my other sites like ex-JWhelp.com, that's ex-JWhelp.com, or storyworkscoaching.com. And let's see about working together to help you find a life that fits you and who you are, maybe for the first time ever. And now, back to our guest.
I'm kind of giving the highlights, but basically at that time, I was with my new girlfriend when all this went down. It happened very quickly, and I don't know if you know the myth of like what does it's like based in reality, which is like what does a lesbian bring to her second date? A U-Haul, That's like
I've not heard that.
Oh yeah, that's a very common thing for lesbians is to move in together really quickly. And so I had done that with my current girlfriend at the time, getting out of that abusive relationship. And so I still had a lot of trauma, right, going on, even though I was out of that abusive relationship finally. I had no business being in a new relationship, right? And so I'm doing therapy, but I'm still also really terrified that she's going to kill me, right? I'm basically in hiding. I'm working a lot still.
You're terrified that your new girlfriend
No,
is going?
the
Oh,
old
you're
one.
old. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
the cop is gonna still find me somehow. And so, even though there was a restraining order out against her, and so there was just a lot of stress during that time, and I brought that into my new relationship, and unfortunately, the woman that I was with, she was only kind of with me, she told me later, because she wanted to be with another ex of mine who I was still friends with. So it was just like this bizarre love triangle that started during that time. And it was just a really dysfunctional time in my life. And I was under so much stress from everything that I ended up having basically like a psychotic break and beating up my new girlfriend, trying to, horribly, and, not really having recollection of what had happened, ending up in a mental hospital for a couple weeks, and just shit hit the fan, basically, of like years of PTSD, stress, workaholism, being in these abusive relationships, drinking too much,
The
not dealing,
cult, your
yeah,
parents.
everything. So
My
everything,
goodness. Yeah, there was a lot of shit to hit the fan there. I
yeah.
mean, you said something about things getting dysfunctional. They've always been dysfunctional.
Exactly. It just came to like this horrible head. And like, I was always this kind of person that's like wanted to help people, was always a really great friend. So to see myself being as an abuser was horrifying. I couldn't believe what had happened, when I kind of came back to reality. It was like the shame of it was really hard to live with. And luckily the woman I was with that I had this incident with, she was she was traumatized herself, obviously, but we took time apart, but she was a nurse and she recognized that I was ill, right? And she never truly judged me for it. She was very compassionate about it. Obviously, that is a cycle of trauma and abuse of her own, right? But and I don't want to speak to her, but she did speak for her, but she did have a lot of compassion for me, and I really did care for her, and I was trying, I was going to therapy, and I moved out. She helped me find a great place, helped set me up, and we ended up getting back together, and it was kind of this on and off again thing for years, but unfortunately she wasn't in love with me. Ultimately, she was in love with one of my exes and my ex was in love with me. And it was just like she would kind of lead her on to get us to break up, because she thought I should be with her, kind of thing. And so this began this whole horrific love triangle for like a few years. We ended up buying a house in the country and leaving San Francisco, and we still had a place in Berkeley, that she shared with some other nurses so we could come into the city and see shows and stuff. But it was very good for me to kind of get to the country and have time to, I became disabled at that time because it was just the stress of it all was really, it was too much, right? Like my recovery, it was needed my full attention. And I became very, hyper vigilant, and my PTSD was really, forward at that time. I was unable to leave the house. I was just terrified that I was going to be murdered by my ex. And so, I was really focused on getting help and therapy and hiding out in the country, basically. So, I got a dog who, saved my life, and she became my, you know, emotional support because, you know, my girlfriend, at the time was gone for, to work as a nurse. She would have 3 days on, 5 days off, 5 days on, 3 days off, right? was her schedule. So I was alone a lot up in the country. And so I did need that, animal who could help me be hyper vigilant so I could actually sleep or take a shower. So yeah, and so that was that kind of like that time of my life of like, for the first time I wasn't working in my adult life. And I was just taking time to heal.
You could also probably rephrase that as, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't running.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just stuck with myself and needing to really examine how I had gotten there. And so that became, I was kind of in that situation it took me about 10 years to get to a point where I felt better. A lot of stuff happened during that time too, but I didn't stay with that woman. Our relationship lasted about 5 years in total, but she really was in love with someone else, and so that just didn't work. We had an open relationship, thinking that would help, and I had met someone else who we had this. She would come up and stay, and I wish that I had had the strength at that time to kind of pick her, because she was really in love with me and wanted, to be with me, and came from a great family and was like pretty normal, right? But I just didn't have the strength to not be in a dysfunctional relationship. I just needed that drama in my life during that time, I guess. And so,
Oh, wow. I'm so glad you said that. I needed that drama in my life at that time. Uh, we do often end up repeating the roles. We get comfortable in, we can, again, be comfortable in abuse or be comfortable in drama, because growing up one of Jehovah's Witnesses, then let's add for you all these other layers. I mean, growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses is traumatic and abusive in and of itself. Then you've got your family, the other things that happen, the other abuses, and just everything that has happened to that point. Yeah, I would imagine that living in something that is healthy would be scary and feel abnormal.
yeah, I felt very flat. So, yeah, even though it was anything but, because it was basically like, two love triangles going on at once with so much lesbian drama. But it's like, oh, here's one normal person in the middle of all this who's like, I see you and I love you, and like, let's just get away from all this and start our own life. And I was like, yeah, I think I'd rather stay in this like really unhealthy like cycle with my primary partner, who doesn't really love me, and every year or two decides that we should break up because she's in love with my ex, who doesn't love her, who thinks that ex thinks that I should be with her. And, it was just crazy. So, after we broke up, so during this time, up until that point, I had really zero contact with my family. My siblings, I didn't know what was up with them. Once I got disfellowshipped, like, I had zero contact with my family. So I had no idea where they were, what was up. So, the woman I talked about, that was like the nice, normal person who wanted to be with me, she was like, you should really try and find your siblings. And eventually, I did. She helped me do that, and kind of reconnected with my two sisters, and eventually my brother too. And so one of my sisters and my brother lived in Texas, and my other sister lived in Oregon at the time. And my siblings from Texas came to visit in the country, and we had this like beautiful reunion, and it was lovely. And that kind of reignited my, relationship with my siblings. And one of my sisters has like some developmental delays, the one that lived in Oregon. So at some point, she kind of needed more support, and we ended up moving her down to Texas to live with my other sister. And when my relationship ended, and I had moved down to Joshua Tree to just sort of have a fresh start and be around a completely new environment, completely different than Northern California. My sisters were like, we need you to come to Texas to help, live with my developmentally delayed sister, to help her get her own place and to kind of watch out for her. And, I ended up moving to Texas to be there for my family. And plus, like, I hadn't really been around them my entire adult life, and I wanted to hang out with my nephews. I had gone to visit a few times, and it was awesome to be around my nephews. And so I moved down to Texas and stayed down there for about 5 years, hanging out with my family and helping them out, taking care of my new baby nephew that my sister had, and helping my other sister. She had bought a house, and so I helped her pay the rent and kind of looked out for her. And everything was, I was living in Texas, which wasn't great for dating, but also I needed a break from dating, right? So I didn't date for about 5 years. I think I went on 2 dates and in that whole time, but it was not sustainable because one person just wasn't a good fit, and the other person lived in Austin, which was like 4 hours away, which wasn't going to work. So,
It sounds like you kind of went back to basics, back to family and yourself and starting over.
Exactly. And it was the best thing for me at the time. It was great. And so, my sister, unfortunately, after she had not the developmentally disabled one, but the other one, had a baby. And her first kid had pretty bad postpartum, and she started kind of exhibiting signs of postpartum. And this was not as far as I know, diagnosed, but I believe what happened was she had kind of some postpartum psychosis happen, because one day she just sort of decided that I was evil and that I was a horrible person. And I was, abusing her son emotionally, and and that was it. Like, I was out of the family. So, she turned my siblings against me. She orchestrated this bizarre narrative with this nonprofit I was working with, that I had somehow hacked into their computers and written I don't know. It was bizarre that I had written some letter to the editor at the paper that she worked at that, exposed them for misallocating funds. I was like, I haven't been involved with this nonprofit in months. Like, I was like, you guys really think because I worked in tech that I'm a hacker? Like, you guys really believe this? Like, it was just so bizarre and crazy, I was like, I need to get the hell away from these people. Like, this is not safe for me, right? So I ended up moving back to California. Plus, Trump had just become president, and I was like, I need to get the hell out of Texas. This is going to be bad for gay people. And so I left Texas, moved, and plus there was no reason for me to be there anymore. Like, I wasn't part of the family anymore. So I was like, why am I in Texas? Moved back to California, and was, able to gently, land back in the Bay Area, because a friend of mine needed a roommate, and it was great. I was back in the Bay, and was able to, reconnect with someone that I'd known when I had lived here before, and dated a little bit, and it was great. I ended up getting married, started dating a woman I had a crush on like for 15 years, and ended up getting married to her. And, thank you. She ended up, encouraging me to get my degree. So I'm back in school, and, I have a very different life now, but, still have no contact with my family. It was just a very bizarre switch that was turned on for my sister. She had my brother's wife had reconnected with our mother, and she decided to come visit the grandkids, right? And this was like right before my sister had this break where I was out of the family.
Okay, so you were still there then.
Yeah, but I didn't go. I was like, I have no interest in participating in this. Like, pretending that we're a happy family with this woman. Like, no, thank you. I'm good. And so, she was, I knew that she was going to try and like preach to them and, try and get, that was how she could justify coming, right, to visit. And so it was, I think, very stressful for my siblings, and I wasn't participating in it, and I wasn't going to, and I didn't even want to hear about it really. And in retrospect, I probably should have been there more for her to talk about stuff, but I just had to have boundaries,
You should have been there more for who?
My sister, to kind of talk about the stress of it all and the confusion she probably was feeling around it all. And like, because, yeah, she wanted her sons to meet their grandmother, but also like all of that trauma had to have been reignited,
Well, true. I mean, it's if she's got that, she's a big girl. She could have come to you,
Yeah.
if she needed to talk about something.
Well, I think she probably, I can't remember exactly, but I definitely had strong boundaries of like, if you choose to go and participate in this bizarre, reunion, I don't want to hear anything about it. I really don't. It's too traumatizing. It's like, this is your choice and you're going to have to live the repercussions of it, So I think that was kind of the precursor to, everything that went, me getting kicked out of the family, basically, again.
Well, true. I think the precursor to that was what happened when you all were kids and all of the abuse that went on. And I think that it's not about what happened probably there later in life. It's just you have a lot of very hurt people trying to figure this thing out. And sometimes hurt people end up hurting people.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that you got hurt in that instance, because it would have been nice to be accepted back in the family.
Yeah.
And to have them all turn. But you're not dealing with a lot of people who are super healthy.
Right, exactly. And I think I was the only person that had really gotten extensive therapy at this point, I don't know what they've done since then, but, it wasn't like my brother even believed in therapy, kind of, he was very like still kind of believing it, you know what I mean? Even though he wasn't in the church anymore.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah. So it's definitely like still like the pandemic brought back a lot of the Armageddon fears, It was very triggering living in California, especially during the really horrific wildfires, like waking up during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. You're not alone.
Yeah, having the orange sun that, that was the day I was like, well, here we are. Like, it has come. Here we are. We've made it to Armageddon, and yeah, I guess we're gonna.
And yet here we are.
Exactly. My wife was like, "What is happening?" At the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, this is gonna get really bad. I was like, this is gonna be really, really horrible. Like, we need to prepare. We went out and like bought so much canned goods, so many cleaning supplies. I was like, one of those people, And
we've been preparing for that our whole lives, right? As Jehovah's Witnesses.
This is not a drill. This is not a drill, But all the while in the back of my head of like, you can't hide. Even if you hid in a mountain, it wouldn't matter. No rock will be left unturned. It's like this. It's always there. This hypervigilance of like the end of the world is coming and something really bad is about to happen. Right. I've been in therapy for years and done so much work on unwinding all that, but I don't think it will ever go away.
Well, have you, so therapy often can help you unwind some of the psychological impacts of everything. but therapy often struggles to address the specific doctrines and such of the witnesses, because therapists often don't know those doctrines to speak to them. And I mean, like Armageddon, it's mentioned one time in the Bible. One time in the book of Revelation, you'll find a scripture, one small scripture that mentions the word Armageddon. And yet Jehovah's Witnesses have created this fear and this entire doctrine around the end of the world.
Yeah.
There's so many. The Bible was used as a tool, and if you can start doing your own research into everything that you believed and all of that on that side, which maybe you've done at this point, that can help allay a lot of those fears, because you can see that so much of what we were taught were just out and out lies.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious once you start dissecting it. But what happens, what I've noticed is, like, it takes more than just therapy. Like for me, I always had this, because of, growing up thinking Armageddon could come at any time. What that does to your nervous system is it really puts you on edge. And so I had gotten in a bad car accident in 2018 and got a brain injury. And I actually had a hard time speaking. I had a pretty bad brain shear, and, neurologist wasn't really able to help. Eventually, I found this osteopath who did a lot of body work on me. It was very, something I've had like massage, like pretty intense massage and somatic education to try and heal over the years, but this was on a whole other level of what I've been working with her for the past year or so. And I think that has done more to kind of reprogram my nervous system, where my baseline isn't just anxious, than any of my, well, in addition to, shouldn't say it's not better than therapy, because I had that baseline of therapy. So this was in addition to the next level of reprogramming my nervous system. And I cannot recommend enough doing this kind of somatic work, where you're learning how to be in your body and, lowering your baseline anxiety, and just having, someone being able to go in and kind of calm down your nervous system. I had this problem of clenching my jaw, where she was able to help my body release that.
Yeah, and I think it also probably helps that you got to see. So when you're nervous about a thing already, let's say like the end of the world and always looking for it, and then something happens for the first time in our lifetimes, like a pandemic, and you have this fear that comes up at first, even though intellectually you may not believe the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, emotionally it takes your emotions some time to trust your intellect, right? Because your emotions have not yet experienced this thing, and you're experiencing something for the first time. So sometimes it just takes time for us to catch up, our emotions, our feelings to catch up with what we can see intellectually. And then also, like you said, doing body work can be great, because we can hold a lot of that stuff in our body. There's just a whole lot. And I mean, you've been through so much abuse. Different modalities can really help people in different ways.
So the final thing I think that's been really helpful in the last couple years last year is, I started doing this at the same time as the osteopath and just continuing therapy, is somatic abolitionist work through this book called My Grandmother's Hands, which I worked with an organization where they had us in affinity groups. So we also had kind of core, working with two other people as our core group, and then you'd meet monthly with your affinity group, like all the white people would meet together, and then like all the people of color, people of culture would meet together. And kind of broken out into their source groups, and then like police officers were together, things like that. And so that really teaches you, that book really gets into very detailed practices that you can do somatically to have your baseline not be in fear, and how it relates to white supremacy. And I'm in an interracial relationship and married to a Black woman, so it was really important to me to deconstruct some of my privilege around, being white, and how that plays into my relationship and, the world around us. And all of these kind of factors together kind of came together at the right time in my life, to where my stress level is this, like, you do all this work and you're still really anxious, or you're still really not kind of at the point you want to be, like, calmness wise. I was still kind of like, especially because of my brain injury, it can really affect your baseline to anger. I was still really easy to get upset about things, which was, not really my normal in my last, 6 years of my life. I've done a lot of work to kind of bring my skills into place to where I wasn't like so reactive. But once I had the brain injury, things kind of changed and my base level was back up again. So doing that somatic education, the somatic abolitionist work, seeing the osteopath, doing therapy, all these things slowly kind of all melded together after a year or so of constant work, to really, like, can say, like, yeah, my base level anxiety is like at a much calmer place now. And so I just kind of want to, like, it's a lot of hard work, and I've invested so much money into it over the years, but it's worth it when you start to have healthy relationships and you start to have a healthy reaction to stresses in your life, and you start to be like, I can get upset and have a healthy dialogue around it and not be angry and yelling. These are things, like, people are like, oh, you have borderline personality disorder, you're never going to be able to have a healthy relationship, you're always going to be like a dangerous person in society. And that's not true. People can heal from these things.
Yeah, good for you. I'm glad that you've put in the time and effort to get some healing around these things, and I'm also glad it sounds like you're in a stable relationship that you're happy with, and that's a wonderful thing too, especially for someone who has experienced so much loss and abandonment.
Yeah, but it really, I'm so glad that there's things like this out here where people can hear these stories and be like, it doesn't have to be the way that it is. You can really change your life. It just takes time and effort. And finding the right people. And if you don't have the right therapist, you got to keep looking, right? It's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And what works for one person may or may not work for another person, and
Exactly.
we all have to figure out who we are and what works for us. And it's a journey on its own. The healing is a journey on its own for each individual, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's kind of the basic story. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So have you, was there anything, one thing you haven't mentioned a lot in your journey out was there anything that really helped you to wake up? Obviously, you've done a lot of work and healing in different ways, but was there anything that helped you heal or wake up, I guess I should say, when it came to the truth around the doctrine and just everything that you have been exposed to as one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
I think, being exposed to people outside the church is what we wake up. That, when I think about, like, how could these people be evil? They're so nice. Like, they're so normal. Like, these are nicer people than my own family. It's certainly never had, like, such loving relationships with my parents, like witnessing what they had. It's like, something isn't adding up here of, like, what is happening, and, seeing other people, and just the more you start hanging out with people outside the church, then it's like you just start realizing, something's not right here. This is a cognitive dissonance happening, where it's like, these are normal people. These are kind, generous, loving people. How is this making sense, right? So then you're faced with the choice of like, do I continue on, or do I explore this other path, right? And I think you always find yourself at that crossroads, right? Of like, do I go left or do I go right? Do I stay in the church and stay sublimating myself and sublimating my needs and sublimating my joy, or do I kind of follow this path that seems to feel really good, right?
Right, absolutely. Trusting yourself finally. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Do you have anything in particular about your life today that you really enjoy, or is there anything that you're hoping to do in the future? What's good?
Yeah, so I think the next step for us is we're gonna buy a house. So just trying to figure out where to do that. Like, the housing market in California is kind of crazy. So, do we want to move somewhere else? Where would that be? Or, the one good thing that I do, being queer, being gay, you learn that your family of origin is, gay people have always made their own families, right? And so that I feel really lucky in that fact that I have a very strong group of friends that are my family, right? And so, kind of just hanging out with those people and having those people in my life means everything to me. And they've always, I talked earlier about this friend that I've been friends with for 25 years. When early on in our friendship, when I was trying to kill myself a lot, she would come to the hospital, and one day she said to me, someday you're going to see that no matter what you do, I'm always going to be there, and you're going to trust that. She's like, I love you. You're my friend. And I never really had anyone say that to me before,
No, that's a rare thing, and also, yeah, that's a very rare thing. I'll just leave it at.
It is. And, we're sisters at this point, we're going to be friends when we're old, and, I have a few people like that in my life, and I really appreciate that. So, I'm at the point now, I'm 45. We want to buy a house. We've been, saving up to do that. It's gonna happen. And I think that is something that, like, I never thought, like, when I was younger, like, oh, I'm in college, like, I'm going to get my degree. I never thought that would happen, never. I mean, I always hoped I would have a house someday, but it's like all these dreams I have are finally, like, I'm in my middle age, and so I can make them happen, So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, I'm really proud of myself, and especially going back to college as an adult is definitely a trip. Like, I'm learning how to write an essay at 45. It's like, I should have probably done this when I remember when I was in high school, I had gotten a call from a recruiter for Brown, and she was like, I guess one of my teachers had put me forward to her or something, maybe my counselor, because I was, doing peer counseling, and I was obviously a very smart student. I didn't have straight A's or anything, but I was very smart and had, you know, shown that I like to help people, And so she was like, just begging me to put in my application. She's like, we will give you a scholarship. I had no idea what any of that meant. I didn't know that a full ride meant that you would get 4 years of free school. I had no idea. None. I had no idea. And so looking back, that was definitely like a crossroads moment where I chose to stay with the church. And I wish, like, I had just gone on that path of, like, gone to college when I was, who knows what I could have accomplished if I had gone to college younger, So I definitely still have some of that, like, as I'm working through going to college, it has brought up a lot of this, like, older trauma of, like, why didn't anybody, like, I get, say, hey, it can be a lot easier. I guess they were trying to, I just couldn't hear it, but it was
Well, true. If you had gone earlier, you might not have been ready for it
right.
either.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're ready today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's like you can never change your past. Of course, you have to make peace with it. But I'm at the same time I'm like, damn, I really wish I could have done this earlier.
Well, yeah, and it is funny, when we always because look, uh, I had opportunities, scholarships to engineering schools and different things that I turned away as well. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the what ifs. But it's funny. I realized one day that all my what ifs were positive.
Yeah, exactly.
and that it's easy to play it out in that way. But, there's a lot of there's a lot of room there. Doesn't have to have been all positive or all negative. They could have been very gray, somewhere in between. But who knows what it would have been. I'm just glad that you get to go today. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
I hope that and also can we acknowledge that while it's true that had you gone earlier in life, maybe it would have helped you to have some different successes. And I know you've had a lot of struggles, mentally and emotionally through this journey and relationally or whatever the case may be. But you also did accomplish quite a bit, and you kind of rocked it as a young ex-witness lady shunned by her entire family, without any support, and you did a lot of really cool things, and I hope you can appreciate that about yourself
Oh,
as
for
well.
sure. I hope anyone listening to this, like if you're in high school and someone's offering you a scholarship, take it. Leave the church. Go
Well, if only
have
it
that
was that
experience.
easy, right?
You know?
We all would have.
Do it.
Unfortunately,
That leap.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be nice.
That's really what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, I hope that this can reach that one person and they have the courage to leave it behind and take that leap. But of course, each person has their own journey, obviously, right? It's kind of cliche to say, but it's true.
Yep, they're all fighting their own cognitive dissonance, their own,
Yeah.
they're all in the same boat. But I just want to say, to wrap this up, I know that you've got this friend of 25 years who has helped you to see that there are people who will stick around, and I'm not going to pretend that myself or the thousands of people who will listen to this are close to you like that. But I think I can speak for everybody in saying that we're glad that you were not successful, and that we're glad that you're here, and that we're glad that you can share your story, and that you can go to college, and that you can have your wife, and that you can have all these wonderful things in the future. So
Thank you.
just happy that you're still here with us.
Thank you.
As always, I want to thank today's guests for being vulnerable and sharing what they went through as they remember it. It takes a lot of courage to speak up, and I hope that it helps others to know that you aren't alone as well. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Shunned Podcast. You can also join our Facebook support group called Shunned Podcast. The theme song for the podcast is Save Myself by Jane and the Boy. And as I end all of my episodes, love yourself and others, do no harm, and go be happy.
I could crumble into pieces, but I got a million reasons why I won't. 'Cause this heavy is a season, and the sun is always right behind the storm.